In today's video, I'm going to be giving you 37 useful tips to take you from beginner to pro in n8n. I've included chapters below this video, so if you're looking to skip around and find something specific, then you can do that, and you're not going to find many videos that go this in depth, especially on n8n. So if this is the last time that I see you, please just go ahead and drop a like. But if you're really interested in dialing in on your automations, building effective agents, and learning everything that you need to know about generative AI, then I would recommend joining the AI Foundations community. In our community, we have updating courses not only on n8n, but the fundamentals of generative AI. We have intermediate, beginner, and expert level modules. And if you get stuck on a problem along the way, you can join our weekly support calls. Not only is this community a supportive learning environment that's going to make sure that you don't fail when it comes to n8n, but it's also the best network that I've ever built. The people in here are kind, they're clever, and they're all fired up about generative AI. So if you're interested in joining AI Foundations, then you can use the link below in the top pinned comment or the description. Tip number 1 is navigating your canvas. When you first jump into n8n, it can be a bit confusing as to how you can move around and how you can zoom in and how you can select different objects. To move around the canvas, I'm just going to hold down the scroll wheel on my mouse and drag around. You can also hold down Shift and scroll with your mouse to scroll sideways, or you can release Shift and you can just scroll up and down normally with your mouse as well. And let's say that we have some nodes here. If I wanted to highlight specific nodes, I could just click and drag to highlight certain nodes, and then I can just hit delete to quickly delete them. And if I want to bring them back in, I can just hit Control Z. I can also highlight a node like so, and I can click Control C to copy it, and then I can click Control V to paste that node. From there, I can drag to connect them together. I'm just going to drag over all of these and hit delete. Tip number 2 is to save your workflows often. One of the most frustrating things is when you've been working on a workflow for many minutes or hours, and then you come back later tomorrow and you realize that it wasn't saved. I've had this happen to me numerous times. So in order to save your workflow, you can either click on this orange save button if you see it up here, or you can just hit Control S on your keyboard. And as you can see, now it says saved up here. This means that my workflow is saved in its current state. But as soon as I start moving things around or clicking in and changing things within this, if I go back to the canvas, you're going to see that now the save button is back. So I can just click save here and it will actually save my changes. Tip number 3 is to make sure that you're viewing your executions when you need to see what's going on in the background. Right here on the front end, if I have an active workflow and I don't want to change it to a test workflow by clicking the test workflow, I can just go into my executions here using this tab up top next to the editor. This is going to be extremely helpful when you're going in and debugging your workflows. On the left here, I'm going to be able to see any execution that I've ever run using this particular workflow. And if I scroll through these executions here, you're going to see some of them have this little potion next to them. That means that it was a test execution using that test workflow button that appears at the bottom of the screen when you're using the editor. And if you see these workflows with errors, it means that there was an error in one of your nodes when you were using it. So if I click on this error here, you're going to notice that there was an error in sending this normal answer module off. Tip number 4 is to pin your execution data so that you can see what went wrong and you can map in the correct variables and fix things. To do this, you'll go into the executions tab and you'll find the workflow that you want to pin wherever the issue was. Like right here, I'm having an error with the normal answer. So what I'm going to do, if I want to pull this instance into my editor so that I can use the data from these other nodes here that I have, I can just hit debug in editor and it should pull this through. You should be able to see now all of the actual executions that took place. And now I can click into this Telegram node, for instance, and I can see the exact error that took place here. So the chat ID was empty when I ran this. Now I do have a chat ID, but before, when this execution had run before, there was no chat ID in here. So I knew that I had to come in here and I had to paste my chat ID into there as an expression. And that actually fixed this error for me. The other nice thing when an execution is pinned is you can go back into the other nodes here and you can see what happened in those nodes and what kind of data they output. So if I needed to grab this chat ID, let's say it isn't here. Let's say I needed to grab it from the Telegram trigger. Now I can go back and I can see all of the data that executed during this workflow. So I can just pull the chat ID directly into here from that. But if I was in the editor view normally with no pinned data, I wouldn't have been able to see that. When you're ready to unpin a workflow, you can just click into the node, the first node, and you can hit unpin. and then you can go back to canvas, and now you'll still see the data here. But if I just click this little trash can down here, it's going to delete this execution data and bring me back to my empty editor with no execution data coming through. Tip number 5 is to gain an understanding of session IDs. When I first got started with n8n, I had no idea what a session ID was. It was just a foreign concept to me. But a session ID is kind of the magic in the background that makes n8n work. It's what allows your agent to keep a context of the conversation that's happening. So to illustrate this, I'm just going to show you 2 different types of session IDs that you're going to run into. When you're first testing out n8n, you might just use the chat trigger, and I'll go back to canvas, and then I'll add in an AI agent. And right out of the box, this setup right here can work with a normal chat buffer memory, and the session ID just pulls in directly from this chat trigger. With this simple chat trigger, I can just hit chat, and then I can talk to this thing, and I can say, hello, what's your name? And it's going to say it doesn't have a name because it's an AI. It's an AI assistant, right? But if I continue asking questions or saying something, I could say something like, what did I ask you? So as you can see here, I went through a quick conversation, and then I said, what did I ask you? And it said, in this conversation, you initially asked me what my name is. If I didn't have this window buffer memory connected, it would have no idea what happened in this past conversation. It would only be able to take in one prompt at a time and answer those questions independently. But since I have the window buffer memory set up, it's able to remember at least a certain distance back. And if you want to edit this window buffer memory, you can click into it and you can change the context window length. I set it anywhere from 5 to 10 interactions. So this is going to remember 10 interactions back in our chats. But if I go back into the chat, you'll see here that we have this session ID, and this is what it's pulling from. This is kind of like our chat topic or our thread that we're in. If I hit refresh on this and then hit reset, it's going to remove those chats, and this agent isn't going to be able to remember what took place before. Now, this is kind of just set up out of the gate when you're using this normal chat trigger. But what if you wanted to connect another tool like Telegram or WhatsApp or Slack? Well, if you have a more advanced workflow like this, where I have a Telegram trigger and I have multiple different things happening between the manager and the actual chat trigger, I'm going to need to set up the variables and map them in. So to do this, I would run some tests, and then I would get some executions in here where I have the data to pass through. So I would get the Telegram trigger to actually trigger through and get to the manager, and then I would copy to editor. And then you can go into the window buffer memory and you can map the Telegram trigger here. And this is going to pull in the key for the conversation that I'm having with Telegram. So to map this, I'll just change to the mapping toggle right here. I'll click the drop down, and then I'll go into my first Telegram trigger. And depending on the app that you're using, it's always going to have a different variable here for the ID that you need to pull in for your window buffer memory. But you don't need to know how to write those expressions. If you've pinned some data, you can just drag the key right in here. So the key for Telegram is going to be the chat ID. This is going to tell Telegram that we're referring to this specific chat ID every time that it comes back and answers a question with my agent. So I can just drag this ID into the key here, and then that's going to pull through the key for the specific chat that I'm using. You'll also have to map your chat input like so, just by pulling through a variable of the chat input. And in this case, I'm using a Telegram voice or a Telegram text trigger. So we're actually just setting the field here, and then we're pulling the text from that set field. So it's just json.text. But if you were just pulling it directly in here, you wouldn't need these user queries and things like that. You could simply go back to the Telegram trigger. You could find where your text is that's coming in, like I just wrote test here, and I could drag it into the text so that my agent knows where to pull my conversations from. Tip number 6 is to access any AI model that you can think of using OpenRouter. When most people are getting started with AI agents, they just use a simple OpenAI chat model, and that's fine. It works really well for a lot of use cases. But I could delete this chat model here, and we could actually pull in any chat model that you can pretty much think of just by clicking the plus here and then searching in the language models for OpenRouter. You'll see this OpenRouter chat model, and you can click on it, and then we can create a credential for OpenRouter. To get this credential, you can go to openrouter.ai, make sure you get signed in and load in some credits. And then you can go to the keys tab and we can create a key and give it a name. I'll just do test and hit create. Then I can copy the key and I can paste it in right here for my API key, and then I can hit save. It should say connection tested successfully, and then I can close this window. And now if I hit this model drop down here, I can access all sorts of different OpenAI models, but I can also keep scrolling here. And as you can see, we even have some Perplexity models. So it'll have direct access to the internet through Perplexity's model. So let's just say I wanted to use Perplexity, or maybe I want to use one of the DeepSeek R1 models. They're all available with OpenRouter. For now, let's test this out with Perplexity Sonar and go back to Canvas. And then if I go in and I start chatting with this, I can ask it a question like, what's the news for today? And because it's accessing Perplexity, Perplexity actually has web browsing capabilities. So it's going to be able to come back and give me the exact news for today. And I know that this happened because I was just talking with my brother about it. We didn't even need to give this any actual date context. It just knew these things because it was using the Perplexity model with OpenRouter. Number 7 is to use JSON to import and export different nodes or entire workflows inside of n8n. So let's say I have a complex workflow like this one right here, and I want to export it so that I can save it for later, or I can share it with a friend. I can just click on these 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, and then if I hit download, it's going to download a JSON file for me. From there, if I just hit create workflow and then I click on these 3 dots and hit import from file, I'm able to go find that JSON and then hit open, and it's going to bring that workflow in for me just like this. And it's also going to get rid of the credentials if you're not in your same account. So you don't have to worry about credentials in, say, OpenAI getting leaked. The only thing you will have to worry about is if you put credentials in plain text in a header in an HTTP module. If you're exporting your JSON and you have API keys in your actual headers and they're not saved in an environment inside of n8n, then you are going to be leaking your credentials. So be careful with exporting JSON if you have just basic header credentials, especially if you're sharing it with others. Now, let's say I wanted to export and import specific nodes. I can just click on the node that I want to export and I can hit Control C. Then I can just open up a folder using something like VS Code. And if I create a new file, we'll just call it node.json and I'll hit enter. Now, since I copied that node, I can just hit Control V and it's going to paste that node in just like this. So I'll be able to see it in JSON, and I can even copy the JSON directly with Control C. I can head back into a different n8n workflow and click into the canvas, and then I can hit Control V. And as you can see, we have that node right here. Tip number 8 is to use ChatGPT to validate your JSON. You're going to be working with JSON a lot when it comes to using n8n. JSON and XML and any of these structured languages are kind of the language of these large language models and ChatGPT. But if you don't have this data filled out properly and you're trying to pass it as a variable in n8n, or you're trying to, say, copy a node into n8n or something like that, you're going to run into some issues and errors with it not working. For instance, in this case, I have that same node, but I've just made a few formatting errors by just getting rid of some tabs and things like that. And now if I copy all of this, so if you're having issues with your JSON, I recommend going over to ChatGPT, using o3 mini high or even just o3 mini and just saying, validate and fix this JSON without changing the core information. And then I send off a copy and paste of that JSON, and it's going to go through and find anything that it sees that might be problematic, any potential errors where the JSON might not be readable. And it's going to come back with some nice clean JSON. It had these brackets kind of formatted incorrectly, but down here it adds the proper tabs and proper spacing that it needs. And this usually works on the first go, but you might have to tell it again to try again. You might have to tell it what errors you're running into if you're having errors with JSON. But now I should be able to copy this JSON and then go use it wherever I need it, and it should work just fine. My next tip is to give the agent proper context of the time using the now expression. So in this case, I'm using OpenAI's chat model, and this chat model doesn't have any context of the current time. Now on the front end OpenAI interface, it might know a certain time, but in this case, it's not going to know unless I give it to it. So if I hit chat and I just say, what is the furthest into the future that you can remember, you'll see that it says I can provide information based on data up to October 2023. So if I say, what day is it? It's going to say today's date is October 7th of 2023 because it actually thinks that is the current date. Now I'll delete this session here and we'll go back into the AI agent and I can add an option for a system message. And I can just say, you are a helpful assistant. And then I can say today's date is, and then if I hold down shift and I click on the curly brackets and then I put in money sign now, and then I close that off with curly brackets, you're going to see that right off the bat, it's not working. But if I change this to an expression, it's going to pull through a preview here on the bottom, and it'll just keep the expression up here. And that's pulling through the date and time. Now, if I go back to Canvas, I hit save and then I hit chat, I can say, what is today's date and time? And this time it's able to come back with the valid date and time. My next tip is to use tags and naming conventions to organize your workflows. Inside of n8n, if you go up to the upper left of your screen, you can hit add tag, and you can also edit the name of your workflow here. I can just click on this and I can name this my basic workflow. And then if I want to, I can hit add tag, and then I can create a tag for this workflow. Let's just add a tag of basic for this workflow and then click away. And then now in my home screen, I'm going to be able to filter by all of these different tags that I've created for the workflow. This will help you to stay organized once you create groups of workflows that work together, or you just have a certain type of workflow that you're looking for. Have you ever struggled to make an HTTP request inside of n8n? My next tip is to generate your HTTP request using a CURL. And if you can't find it in the API documentation, then you can just use ChatGPT o3 Mini to help you generate a CURL request. So let's say here in my workflow, I want to generate an HTTP request, and I click this plus and then type in HTTP and click HTTP request. Up here, you can see that there's a button to import CURL. If I click on that, I can just paste the CURL command right here. Let's say, for example, that I wanted to use this site, rapidapi.com, which allows me to generate all kinds of different API requests. First, I'll search and find the endpoint that I want to use. And the endpoint is basically just whatever feature you want to use for this API. In this case, I want to use Yahoo News, and this is under the YH Finance. And here I can see all of the different endpoints that I can use for this Yahoo Finance. I'm going with this market news, and if I want to, I can just see the parameters right here. And I can also see that there's a curl request available right here that I can just copy, and I can paste the curl command here and hit import. And then that's just going to fill out my entire HTTP request for me. And I can just hit test step. And then as you can see, it's pulling through the Yahoo News just like that. It's that simple. Now, let's say I wanted to generate a CURL for a site that I can't find the CURL for in their documentation. I can just say something like generate an HTTP CURL command for, and in this case, I would just insert the tool name. I would just say 0 code kit in order to generate an HTTP request for run Python. Now, all I have to know is the service that I'm trying to contact and the endpoint that I'm trying to use. And I can just send this off. Make sure that you have search selected when you send that off so that it can search the web and it can figure out how to do that. And then it should come back with a CURL command that you can use. So I'll just copy this. I'll head back into my workflow and I'll create a new HTTP module. And then I'll import another curl, and we'll try this out and see how it does. So I'll just paste my new CURL in here and then hit import. And it's not letting me import it. It says that it's an invalid CURL. So I'm just going to copy it. I'll bring it back into ChatGPT, and I'm just going to say this CURL is not working. Give me the fixed CURL. And this is an iterative process, guys. It's not going to work on the first go every single time. If it does work on the first go, then you're in luck. But a lot of times you're going to see that there are some issues with this methodology because it is generative AI that we're dealing with, but it can help you out quite a bit. So in this case, it just changed the payload. It added more slashes around here. So I'll just copy this. And let's give this new CURL command a try just by hitting import. Still not working, so I'll try again. I'll say research the API documentation in depth and give me the proper CURL. This still isn't working. And it gives me some things that it found in the documentation, and then it updated the curl command. Tried a few iterations of this, but this time I just told it to give me the most basic formation of an HTTP request. I'm not passing through the credentials in this one. I'm just going to copy this curl. Let's try this again and hit import. And this time it worked. So what you have to keep on doing is telling it to keep stripping back what it's actually adding in there. The reason that this one wasn't going through at first was because it wasn't able to pull through the value into this code, but all I need is the basic template, and then I can come in here later and I can fill out the HTTP request and give it the body parameters that it needs. I'll always need to tick send headers and send a header credential, or I can just use the authentication dropdown, go to generic credential type, and I can select a header auth if I want to, or any other type of auth as well. Tip number 12 is to save your API credentials for your HTTP requests in n8n's environment. If I click into my Yahoo Finance node right here, you're going to notice that I have my API key right here. And this is a quick and easy way to get started, just using the send headers to turn on your header parameters and then passing the API key through like this. But if you want to have this saved for future HTTP modules where you're going to use this key again, or you want to be able to export this blueprint and give it to other people, then this is not ideal because it's not secure for your API keys and it's just not as quick. So what you can do instead is copy your API key, and I'll just delete this item here, and then scroll up to your authentication, click on generic credential type, and then click this select dropdown and click header auth. From here, I can add a new credential, and I can save my credential right here. So I can just type in x-rapid API-key, and then I can paste in my credential right here and hit save. I'll actually rename this as well, and I'm just going to say rapid API key and hit save again. And now I'm going to close this and we'll test this step again to see if it works. Perfect, so it's still accessing my key and it's still pulling through our articles. Now, if I go back to Canvas and I want to reference this again in a new module, I can just create a new HTTP request. Let's say I want to use a get. And now I can just click the authentication type, go to generic credential type, select the header auth, and then I can select the API keys that I want to use. I have API ninjas in here. I also have my rapid API key. But I will add, sometimes n8n is not the best at passing this header auth. So sometimes you're just going to have to deal with passing it through the header like this. Sometimes it's more explicit and it works if you're running into an error with your HTTP requests. Tip number 13 is sometimes you need to just use a normal chat completion. You don't actually want to use an agent node. So when do you want to use a normal chat completion and when do you want to use an agent node? So the agent node right here can be especially versatile if you need to save a window buffer memory with it and you want to chat back and forth with it using a chat tool like this. With this setup, it's going to have a consistent memory and it's going to be able to hold the context of the conversation. Where the AI agent node can get a bit limited here is when you go in and you have it outputting in JSON. So if I require a specific format and then I connect an output parser, like this structured output parser here, you're going to notice that I can give it a predefined output that it needs to have, like state and cities. And I'll just show you an example of this, how this works. So right here, this JSON example is pretty nice. I'm just going to use that as an example for this agent. And I can go in here and I can tell it always output in this JSON format. And I can give it the JSON format that I want it to output in. And then I can go back to the canvas and I can chat with this and I can just say, give me the best city for a first time visitor in the US. And I can send that. And as you can see, it's going to come back with this JSON object. Now, where this can be limiting is if I want to change this output structure and I want it to be different every single time, I can't do that with an expression here. This output structure is always going to be state and then an array of cities. But in this automation right here, this is set up so that I can put in an input and then it's going to give me a different output structure every time. But it's still going to be structured as one of these types of answers. In this case, we're just using a normal query classifier to say what type of answer it needs to output right here. And then it's going to go and grab the JSON structure from an airtable, based on the query that it selected. So if it selected math, it's going to go select the math structure. And then this model right here is going to always enter dynamically with a different answer structure. So I can pass in the structure like this, and I can just turn on output content as JSON. I don't even need an output parser. It will just use the structure that I give it right here. So I can pass the structure as a variable, and it's going to answer differently every single time once I get my final answer based on whatever this is classified as. I have a full module on this in the classroom. If you go into the n8n mastery course, and then you scroll down to the output format swapper, this is going to explain this in depth if you're interested in how this works. Again, you can access our courses and our community by using the link below in the description or the top pinned comment. Tip number 14 is to have ChatGPT o3 Mini or another model actually write the expressions for you, especially when they're more complex. n8n is super powerful when it comes to expressions, and it actually uses JavaScript behind the scenes to generate these expressions. So the sky is truly the limit when it comes to expressions, but if you don't know how to write these out and you don't have the time to write them out, then sometimes ChatGPT can be super helpful. Right here, I'm writing out a system prompt for an agent, and I want to pull through some of this data here in a more natural language kind of way. So what I want to do is give this agent what I'm telling it here: available response record IDs and when to use them. So if I go back, I'll see here that I have some JSON coming in, and this JSON has record IDs, and it also has the when to use it. This is all coming from the previous aggregate node. So if I copy all of this here, and then I head over to ChatGPT and I just turn on the search and I say something like, write an n8n expression that receives data like this and turns it into a structured list of record IDs and when to use them. And I'm just going to paste this, and I'm just going to say, all I want is a list like this. And I'm just going to say when to use it, and then a dash and record ID here. When to use it, record ID here, etc. So I'm just giving it the basic structure that I want, and I'm really simplifying all of this JSON that's coming through to save on context window. So I'm just going to send this off now. And it's key that I said write an n8n expression, because it's actually going to search the web and figure out how to do that. And I also gave it an example of the JSON that's coming through and an example of what I want it to show up as. So then it's going to give me an expression that I can use in n8n, and I can try this out. So I'll just hit copy, and I'll go back into my prompt. I'll make sure expression is on, and I'm just going to paste this in. And what do you know? It's actually pulling in an error. So what I'll do is I'll open this up in a full window, and I'll just see, okay, it's undefined. So I can take this back to ChatGPT, and I can say, this expression is returning undefined. Research the n8n docs and come back with a versatile expression that handles data similar to the data I'm passing in and returns a useful when to use it and record ID for each of the items in the list. Make sure the when to use it stays with its exact record ID. So this time I just gave it a little bit more detail, and I showed it the error that I was getting. And you'll notice that a lot of times when I'm using ChatGPT for these things, it's not going to work on the first try. So you have to be persistent, and you have to think about where it's going wrong and give it a lot of context. It's just like a human in that sense, right? The more context you can give a human consultant, the better it's going to be able to come back with an answer. So let's try this next one here. All right, so let's see what it gave us. It gave us adding fallbacks. So now it's actually adding fallbacks for these different variables coming through. So I'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll try pasting this in. And it's saying know when to use it provided. So let's make sure that's actually what this is called. So I'll just drag this in. Yeah, when to use it. And then I'll also pull in this record ID. So this is the structure that I'm looking for, and this is saying know when to use it provided. So this isn't actually correct. It's not pulling through the right when to use it. So I'm just going to pull these two things in, and I'm going to paste it, and I'm just going to say this hit the fallback. However, I know there's data in there that should pull through. And then I'll say, for example, when I use this basic single selection of one of them, it works. And then I'll just say, I want this type of expression, but for any available items it can pull in. It should get all the when to use it, and I'll make sure to capitalize that like it is in the actual variable, and its corresponding record ID. Let's try this again, and let's see if this basic one works, and if this doesn't, then I'll try this one. All right, so I'll remove everything here, and I'm just going to paste in this new expression. And this time it worked. It pulled through all of our different cases with their corresponding record IDs. If you have a workflow branching out into two separate directions and you have it doing all of these different things, but you need it to all come back into one step at the same time in the same data packet, then what you can use is a merge node. So tip 15 is to use a merge node in order to pull your data back together when a workflow has gone off in multiple directions. So in this case, I have a Telegram trigger that's sending off, and it also has this switch right here to decide if it's a voice message or just a normal text message, and then it would normally go into the agent. Now, normally, I wouldn't necessarily need to map that in. With a merge, I could just go straight into here, because in this case, with this, it's always going to go down one of these routes with the switcher. It's never going to be both of the routes. But in the case of this get memories, I'm always going to have two items that need to go into this agent here. So that's where the merge node comes in. So what I can do is I can pull both of these into input 1, and then whichever route it goes down, whether it's a normal text or it's a voice coming in, it's going to end up in input 1 as the same variable. It's going to be called text. Just like I set up in this variable right here, I set up text as the variable. And the transcribe node is also going to turn our voice into a text variable. So text is coming into the merge regardless. But this down here, the get memories, always needs to come into the merge as well before it hits the AI agent. If I had all of these things going directly into the AI agent, what you would notice is one might complete before the other, and then this one might come in later down the line and re-trigger the AI agent. But to make sure that they all hit at the same time, I'm just going to use this merge node, and I'm just going to use 2 inputs. This is the maximum that will work with the merge node for this use case. If you set it up with 3 inputs, it won't work, but in this case, it will work if we use the merge node, and you have to have the merge node set up in this exact way. So if I click into the merge node, I have the mode set to combine, and I have it combining by all possible combinations. So if you have these settings right, it should be able to complete all of these executions over here on this side before moving on to the next step. It won't just go down one route and then complete that and then have to go back to this later and then hit this again. If you're having a problem passing a JSON object or a JSON array through some nodes, and it's just showing up as object, or it's throwing some array text in there or something like that, and it's not just passing clean JSON through, then tip number 16 is to use the JSON stringify expression. In this case, this code right here is generating some JSON, and it's passing it into this HTTP request. If this HTTP request is having an issue with retrieving that JSON, then I can just come in here and I can go into my variable and I can add in JSON.stringify around it, and I can put some parentheses around it, just like so. And that should pass the JSON in the correct way. Tip number 17 is to use the split out node. In this case, I'm contacting Poke API. So if I test this workflow, it's just pulling in each of these Pokemon and a URL to call for each Pokemon if I wanted to run them through their own HTTP request to get more information about them. So if I wanted to split these out and use them individually in some kind of automation or run some kind of operation, I could just hit this plus button right here. And then I could type in split, and I should see split out. From there, I can click on it. And now that it's connected here, just like so, what I can do is I can decide which fields I want to split out. So if I want to split out everything within this results array right here, I can just type results. Then I can hit test step. And if I go back to the canvas, as you can see, it split this out into around 1,300 different items. Now, what if I wanted to pull all of these items back together into an array? This is going to happen from time to time when you're using n8n. You're going to have a bunch of items and you want to pull them back together. Tip number 18 is to pull your items back together using aggregate. So I can just hit this plus button right here. I can type in aggregate, and then I can click on this aggregate node. And then let's say I just wanted to get the names of all of these Pokemon. I could just change this input field name to name, because that's what it's called right here. All of these have a name to them. And then if I test that step, it's going to aggregate all of the names into one item like so. So we went from an HTTP request that went and got everything, then we split it out, then we aggregated just the names through. So now we can perform an operation on those names and we don't need all of those URLs in there. Tip number 19 is to convert your files to binary. A lot of times, different programmatic operations that you're going to need to run can't accept just a normal image, audio, or video file. They need to receive it in binary. So I've created an automation here that contacts 11 labs to create a voice slogan. And I have this model right here that accepts a chat and it just gets to say like exactly what my company is about. So in this case, I would say, my company is a power washing company that cares about customers' satisfaction. Okay, very generic, right? But if I just go back to Canvas and I test this workflow, it's going to go off and generate a slogan, and then it's going to put it into 11 labs, and 11 labs is going to come through with this audio file right here. If I view it and then I hit play,
clear, clean, clear care, satisfaction guaranteed.
It created a beautiful slogan for me. But let's say I needed this file to be in binary and I needed to pass it to another tool that only accepts binary. Since this is outputting a file over here, I can just click the plus button and then I can type in binary and you'll see that we have extract from file. So if I hit extract from file and then I hit move file to base 64 string, now I can set the input binary field, which is data right here, and the destination output field, which we're just going to call base 64. And then if I test this step, it's going to turn that audio into a base 64. So then I could pass this base 64 to a code node or something like that if I wanted to perform some kind of operation on the binary. Tip number 20 is to use the convert binary to file to do the reverse operation. So sometimes you're not going to start with a file and then end up with base 64 using this extract from file. Sometimes you're just going to get the base 64 string. Like in this case, I'm using a different 11 labs endpoint and I'm testing the workflow. And on the other end, I'm getting back base 64, but I'm also getting all of this other useful data for timestamps for this text. So I could go and run operations on this, but let's say that I actually wanted the MP3 file for this as well. To get the MP3 file for that binary, I can just click the plus right here and I can type in base 64 and then we can convert to file. And then I'll move a base 64 string to a file. In this case, I would need to map this base 64 right here to the base 64 input field. So I could just type in audio underscore base 64. And then I could test this step and it would output this binary string here as a file.
This is a test.
Sometimes when you're working with URLs, you're not going to be able to actually pull the file from a URL. Like maybe in a Google Drive, you have an image or something like that, but you can't actually use that for anything and you can't pull the file from the URL. There's numerous file storage tools where you can actually upload your files, but then you can't pass the URL for that file as a variable. Google Drive is a notorious culprit for this, and it often causes a lot of heartache for people because getting Google Drive set up in the first place is kind of a pain with their credentials. Tip number 21 is to use the right file storage to pass URLs. In this example here, I have a short form video automation where I upload binary into an app called Cloudinary. And the reason that I'm using Cloudinary for this is not because Google Drive can't accept an upload of binary, but it's because uploading to Cloudinary will allow me to actually get a link that I can use in the future. In this example, I'm going to generate some binary. So in here, we now have some binary that we can upload. And then if I go back over here to Cloudinary, you're going to notice that this is uploading the file. This is an HTTP request that's just pulling in the base 64 and it's uploading it in an MP3 format to Cloudinary so that I can actually use this URL later down the line. If we were uploading it to something like Google Drive, oftentimes Google Drive is not going to be able to pass URLs programmatically correctly for the next step to be able to use it. So if I test this upload to cloudinary and then I scroll over here, it's just going to give me this clean URL right here. And this URL is actually going to allow me to both view this file from the URL, but it's also going to allow me to do different operations with it. This URL is going to allow the video editing application to actually download that information. Whereas if I was passing the base64 in directly, or I was passing in an invalid URL like a Google Drive URL, then this wouldn't work. Tip number 22 is to combine variables using the set field to pull them into one individual variable. This example will make this make a lot more sense. In this workflow, I have this ideator chatgpt chat completion here, and this generates scripts, but the way it generates the script is in different parts. I have an intro, a base for the middle of the script, and then I have a call to action in the outro. I want to be able to break this script into multiple parts for later in my automation when I'm doing analytics, but some parts of my automation, like generating the audio for the voiceover, are going to require that the script is in one long piece, and it actually includes everything. So that's where I use the set field module to create a full script. You can get this just by hitting the plus here and then typing in set, and you should see the edit fields set. I'll show you a quick example with this ideator. So if I click into here, it generates a whole bunch of different data, but it generates it based on this user query. A video about the human brain with an interesting fact. And here in the system prompt, you'll notice that it's instructed to output a script with an intro, a base, and a CTA. And it also outputs a title and a description. So it's outputting all of this information because it will be useful for later, but I just want to combine the script into one item. So we'll go ahead and test out the ideator. And if I click into it, it's done its job. It's created an intro, it's created a base for the script, and it's created a CTA. But what if I wanted to combine all of this into a single script variable? To do that, I could go back to Canvas, and then in this script here, I can just pull in each of the individual variables. So I could drag in the intro, and then I could put a space. I could drag in the base, put a space, and then I can drag in the CTA. So now all of my variables combined together create a full-blown script. So if I hit test on this now, it's going to pull the intro, base, and the CTA all together into one unified script so that I can pass that off to 11 Labs and have a script generated for me. Sometimes it feels like an automation is working, everything is flowing through, but there's something wrong with your output. You have green arrows all the way through and the automation's running just fine, but you're just not getting that output that you expected. Tip number 23 is to work through your nodes and find where the error is. So in this example, I have my financial analyst agent that can generate charts, and it can also just respond with information about my query and answer questions. Basically what happens is if I say create a chart of Tesla from Jan 5th to Jan 10th, it should be able to know that I need a chart generated. But if I test this workflow and I hit send on this, let's see what it does. So it moves through, it goes down the path, and it comes back with an answer. It says below is the chart for Tesla using hourly candlesticks from January 5th to January 10th. The problem here, as you can see, is it went down the wrong path. It was supposed to go up here and generate a chart, but it didn't do that. It came back with a regular response. So what could it be? Is it my system prompt within my agent? Is it that it's just not smart enough to get this request figured out? Well, if you're getting a full execution and everything looks good, your system prompt is spot on. Like in here, if I just click into here, I can see that my system prompt tells it very explicitly how to do this. It shouldn't expect that there's a chart in here, right? But if I go back to my canvas, if I work back further into the other nodes, I should be able to find where the problem is. So in this case, I'm going to first check what the response type selector sent through here. So the response type selector sent a response type of answer. Why did it send answer when it was supposed to send generate? I've instructed this response type selector to send through generate when a chart request is made, like create a chart of Tesla. Let's click into the response type selector. As you can see here, I was really clear in my instructions. I said, determine if you should generate a chart or respond normally. If the user query requires a chart to be generated, answer with generate. If it requires a normal answer, answer with answer. And how much clearer can I be when I say create a chart of Tesla from blah, 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 blah. So if I investigate this further, it might be an issue with the user query. So let's scroll down to the user query. And as you can see, we're missing a variable here. So now if I drag in the text, it should be able to actually get that user query. So now we've solved our problem, right? Let's go back to the canvas and let's go ahead and delete this current data and test the workflow. I think I got this thing figured out. So I'm just going to send off my same response here and I'm going to send it and we'll see how this thing does. So this time I said create a chart of Tesla from Jan 5th to Jan 10th of 2025. Let's see if it goes down the correct route and generates my chart for me. All right, so it went down the proper route this time and we're generating the chart request right here. It's using its tool to figure out what time it needs. And now it should pass the data on to the next step and eventually go and generate my chart to send it back. All right, and then we run into another error here, but I'm not getting any issues and we're not getting a chat back. So next, I need to work through to find where the next problem might be. I'm guessing right off the bat that it's probably in Get Financials. But if I click into Get Financials, I'm going to notice that it passed through a ticker of Apple with 1 hour and a start and end time. So why is it pulling in Apple? And what are these dates that it's pulling in, right? Like, how did it actually get these dates? So the Get Financials seems to be working fine. It's just pulling in the wrong information here. So if I go back to Canvas, and then I go into my generate chart request, maybe I can find the error here. It looks like we're missing the user query again. So if I go back to the Telegram trigger and I pull in the text, this time it should go through. So I'll just test this step to save some time. And boom, this time it worked. It actually pulled through Tesla because it got my user query this time. Now let's continue on. I'm going to run the Get Financials. And it output 3 items. So now we'll run aggregate. We'll run variables. I'll run the code, the HTTP request. And finally, I'll generate my chart. And just like that, it finally fulfilled our request here. It was just a few simple things that I was missing, a few simple variables that I was missing from my system prompt. Sometimes an LLM isn't going to have the data that it needs to actually give you a proper answer. This is where sourcing your own data, storing it somewhere, and then giving access to an LLM is going to be helpful. Tip number 24 is to use an airtable database as a tool in order to give context to an agent that has a specific task that it needs to perform. For this example, I've just created a basic airtable, and this airtable has all kinds of different memes in it. And these are just called Wojaks, and some of you guys may have seen them on the internet. They're kind of just these funny memes to describe certain situations or certain scenarios. And I have images of them, and I also have the looks, the emotions, the description, and their mission. So if I go into my AI agent here, I've given it some system instructions, and I just told it you can use the tool access Wojak DB to get Wojak information. It's your job to always access the Wojak database to tell me which Wojak describes my current situation most closely. And for the sake of this example, I'm just going to say always use the tool and respond with the Wojak that embodies my situation. I'll say also include an image URL hyperlinked into the Wojak's name so I can click it to see which Wojak that is. Now I'm going to add a tool, and I'm going to add an airtable tool. And we'll select the base Wojak DB. And then for the table, I'm going to select Wojak characters. And I'm going to change the operation here to search. And I'm just going to return all of the characters here. I'll rename this tool so that it knows exactly what tool I'm referring to. And I'll go back to Canvas. And now I'm going to hit save. Now let's go ahead and hit chat. And I'm just going to tell it I'm currently recording a video called 37 Tips and Tricks for using n8n. Let's go ahead and send this off. And as you can see, it accessed my database. All right, and it returned this Wojak right here. And it says this Wojak represents wisdom and deep thinking, which aligns well with the process of curating and sharing knowledge through tips and tricks. And I'll scroll down here, and as you can see, it gave me this Wojak meme. Now, obviously, this is kind of satirical, and it was kind of a fun little example, but what if you wanted to handle bigger data and you wanted to handle more serious problems? In that case, you'd need a Postgres database. Now, I don't have a ton of data laying around, but I do know somebody that does.
Hey there everyone, Drake here, also from AI Foundations. Now, I wanted to take over tip number 25 because it perfectly aligns with something I'm doing right now. You're going to get to a certain stage in your agent development where a Google Sheets or an Airtable is not scalable enough for your needs. For example, I track every night of sleep on this thing called an Aura Ring. It uploads to a cloud, and from the cloud, what I can do is I can pull in this data to something called a SQL database, otherwise known as Postgres. So here's what that data looks like. As you can see, I have movement data here, and what this movement data is doing is tracking my movement every 30 seconds every single night. So every 30 seconds, it's going to give me a score of heavy movement, light movement, moderate movement. As you can see, as I move on throughout the night, the movement gets a lot more light since I've settled down. But if it's tracking in 30-minute timestamps every single night, as you can imagine, when you get hundreds of nights in here, there is loads and loads of data. In this case, in this table alone, there's over 220,000 rows. That doesn't include my other tables. You know, I've got 20,000 records of heart rate data. Heart rate only tracks every 5 minutes. HRV data, the same, another 22,000. So when we're talking to our agent, we're not just sending it off to look at single rows like you usually would in Airtable or Google Sheets, but instead you're using something called DQL. And this is an SQL query that actually formats your answers in a way to where it can pull specific information based on your request. So let me show you an example of what this looks like. I'm just going to hit chat down here. I have a very basic sleep agent set up connected to my sleep database. I can ask very specific questions. I can get ranges. I can do all sorts of things with this, over 300,000 rows of data here. So I have two tools that I'm using, a sleep schema and a sleep data. The sleep data is dynamic, so my agent is going to create an SQL query, which is like a search query, basically, for this database in order to communicate with it and in order to give me the data that I request. This is the first tool, Sleep Schema, and this is just looking at the structure of my database. It's seeing all the tables, all the columns I have, so it knows which query to actually execute when the time is ready. So I can ask a basic question like, what was my average heart rate? And I spelled average wrong. I'll spell that correct. In January. Beautiful. I can send that off. And what it's going to do is actually first search the structure of my database, as it just did, and then it's going to execute a query in order to give me my average heart rate in January overnight, which was 59 beats per minute. And the cool thing about this is I can even go ask hyper-specific questions about movement data, about sleep data, sleep stages. I can say around 2:30 a.m. on January 14th, what sleep stage was I in? Let's see if I was in a deep sleep, REM sleep, light sleep, or if I was awake at that time, which I would not be surprised. I'm going to send that off. And as you can see, it says around 2:30 a.m. on January 14th, you were in the light sleep stage. And the beautiful thing about having Postgres connected to an AI agent is that if it runs into an error, it doesn't just stop your workflow, okay? What it's going to do is actually take it back to the AI agent. It's actually going to analyze why it got that error, and then it's going to re-query this database. So as you can see, it brought in all of my sleep labels from this query right here. So this SQL query that gets created would be the same as us coming into the database and doing this manually, except like, for example, if I go to the SQL editor and I paste this in, I could hit enter or control enter and it would run that and get me all of my sleep stages, my sleep labels from this time period. But we're just doing all of this within our AI agent right here. Our AI agent is generating those queries for us so that we don't have to manually come in here and search for it ourselves. So this is the idea of Postgres. Very scalable. I mean, as you can see, I have hundreds of thousands of records in here, and it's returning answers in a matter of 15 seconds that are hyper-specific down to the timestamp of a certain night. And you could even do multiple ranges. You could do little ranges. It's entirely up to you. But when you're dealing with a large amount of data, you're going to need to eventually upgrade from Airtable and Google Sheets and Notion to a more robust system using Postgres with n8n. All right, Carter, back to you.
Thanks for taking over on that one, Drake. I appreciate it. And now we're moving on to tip number 26, which is to use a RAG database if you need to access large amounts of data and pull out contextual bits of information. The problem with traditional search is you're using a database, so even if it's a powerful database like a Postgres database, it's not able to search that information for contextual or semantic meaning. So that's where you'd implement a RAG system using n8n. To implement RAG in n8n, you're going to need a document pre-processing flow, which takes PDFs from Google Drive and turns those into a vector store in a Pinecone database. And then you need to create a retrieval step like this one here that's actually accessing that database where I've uploaded documents. So in this example, I've uploaded 2 PDFs. I've uploaded the efficacy of red light therapy for sleep, and I also uploaded this sleep and the effects of low sleep over time. Now, let's say I wanted to chat with these long research paper documents. For an example, let's say that I was chatting with this document and I wanted to find out something about this line here. So it says the therapy involves using low-level red light, often in wavelengths between 630 nm and 700 nm, to promote cellular recovery and improved physiological functions. So if I wanted to ask my agent something about all of these documents, but I don't want to pass in the documents directly to avoid any context issues, I could just go into my retrieval step here, and I could chat with my agent, and I could just say something like, give me the wavelengths of red light from the sleep database that will promote cellular recovery and improve physiological functions. And if I send this off, it should go and access the sleep database. So it's reading specific bits of that sleep database, and then it's coming back with an answer. And it says here, 630 nm to 700 nm. So as you can see, it pulled that directly from the sleep database and then formulated an answer for me. Tip number 27 is to generate code to format your HTTP requests. For this example, I have a Telegram agent set up right here, and what this is allowing me to do is send a Telegram message over to my chat model right here. This chat model then constructs a list of requirements for the aircraft that I'm looking for, and then it passes that to a construct aircraft request URL. Then we send that over to an API that has aircraft data, and that filters out the request for the list of aircrafts that we want to pull through. And then we send it to another code node here, and that'll turn the response into a new HTTP request that can then be sent off to request a table. Then that table is sent to Telegram in the form of an image. So I'm going to show you the methodologies for creating these code nodes that fill out these HTTP requests dynamically. But first, let me show you how this thing works. I'll just say I'm looking for private jets that will be able to accommodate a family of 6 for domestic travel. I'll send this off, and as you can see, it returns this nice table for me here with some aircrafts that are going to be able to handle this kind of use case. And this is dynamic. It doesn't just work for this type of table. I can also send it a request such as give me a list of aircrafts that can handle 200 plus passengers. And this time it's going to return some Boeing and Airbus. So the magic of this customization really is in the parameters that the OpenAI model chooses to search for. So if I click into here, you'll see that I have a system message for it. And it just says, you help the user filter out aircrafts that they may be interested in and form search parameters for specific aircrafts they're looking for. If the user is looking for more than one, always make the limit higher than 1 based on how many you think should be returned based on the user query. It's your role to return any combination of these objects in JSON. Enter null for any optional fields, but always fill required fields. And then I just say return the JSON object in this format, and I give it some instructions on how to fill out all of these different parameters here. And then I just give it a quick example request. Now it's going to pass that JSON off to this construct aircraft request URL right here. And this code, which I'm going to show you how to create, is basically just taking that simple JSON object and it's turning it into a URL that the aircraft API can understand. So then it's just passing off that URL as a variable every time to this request aircrafts URL from API Ninjas. Then once this outputs the list of aircrafts, it's going to construct a table using this next HTTP request. So this just receives JSON of a list of aircrafts and turns it into a URL that can request a table. Then it passes that URL off to this other GET request right here that's just getting a chart using quickchart.io. And then quickchart.io processes the request from the URL that this table constructor generated, and then it returns an image to Telegram. So every time that you want to create one of these code nodes that can take information in and then create a processed result, even if the information coming in is dynamic and it's constantly changing, like based on my question over here that I'm asking, it's going to be different whether it's a private jet or it's a commercial aircraft. And this message and model node will handle filling out the request. Now, once you want to construct one of these code nodes here, you're going to need to know the input format coming in from this previous node, and you're also going to need to know the output required for the HTTP URL format right here. And then again, this is going to output a specific format, and you're going to need to know the format that's coming into this code right here. And then you're also going to need to know the output format that's required for the next HTTP request. And then you can construct a prompt to send off to ChatGPT. Something like this will work well. I just say, I want to use an n8n JavaScript code node. That's this right here that I'm referring to. And if I click into it, you'll see that I'm on the JavaScript language. And then I tell it the input format for that code node. So I'm telling it what that ChatGPT module is outputting and what's going into the code node. So I'm receiving JSON like this into the code node, and I want it to check which values are available and output an HTTP request to use API ninjas. And then I give the endpoint for API ninjas. Keep in mind, I also have search web on so that it can go find that endpoint and see how that URL needs to be formatted for the GET request. And then I give it some example JSON. So this example JSON that I'm giving it here is the input format from the previous node. To see what that looks like, I can just go to my executions. And then if I go into a successful run right here, and I just copy it to my editor, I should be able to click into this and I should see the output format here, but I want to switch it to JSON. And I'm just grabbing the content right here and then pasting it in as an example. Then I say the output should be an HTTP request URL with the proper parameters and omitting any null values. The reason I say that is that sometimes this is going to have null values for these. It's not going to be required for the search. So I'm telling it to just omit those from the final URL request that it does. Then I say it should be able to construct custom HTTP requests based on the incoming JSON. And then I just say, here's an example of what a simple URL would look like. And this one would just be where the manufacturer and the model are filled out in the incoming HTTP request. The rest of these would be null in this case, because this is a very simple example. It doesn't have a lot of the parameters appended to the URL. It just has manufacturer and model. And then I just say if manufacturer and model were the only items filled out, just kind of explaining that this URL example is only if the manufacturer and model were the only objects filled. Then I say, please give me the JavaScript code with variables for all the items coming in that JSON object to it. The full JSON coming into the code node will look like this. So I'm giving it the full JSON. I'm giving it everything that previous message and model node has output. So it's going to output an index, a message. Really, all I need is this content right here. But since all of this is coming out, I wanted to give it an example of everything, not just the content that we're interested in. This structure right here is going to help OpenAI craft better code here. And then I just say, give me the JavaScript I can use to output custom URLs based on this. And I gave it the output format right here that it needs to know for this step, passing it over to the HTTP request. And then it gives me an example of the JavaScript code that I can use. And I just copied this and I pasted it into this code right here. So this is basically just the code that ChatGPT gave me on the first run. And when I test this, it turns this message right here with all of this JSON information into a simple URL that has the engine type of jet and the limit of 10. Since the rest of these are empty, it just pulled engine type jet and limit 10, and then it constructed this beautiful URL here. Now, if you want to know the information for all of these steps, you're going to need to actually go find the API docs for how the request should be received for each of these items. So for this one, I had to go to API ninjas so that I could give that context to my OpenAI chat model right here. So you can think of these HTTP requests as just having parameters that are supposed to go into them and a specific output that comes out of them. And then also like how those parameters are passed into them. So this request aircrafts can receive multiple multiple parameters that give it information about what type of aircraft to request. Sometimes some of these aren't going to be available, but sometimes they're all going to be here. And that needs to get passed in a specific format. That format is created using this code node here. Then it's going to have a specific output. Maybe it'll be a JSON object or something like that, or maybe it'll even be like an image. Whatever you want to do with that next step, you can then pass it into a new code node. If your code node isn't outputting the right format for these HTTP requests on the first try, you might have to go back and forth with ChatGPT and work on getting the proper output for these HTTP requests in order to get them to send through consistently. So tip number 28 is to utilize API kits. I call these API kits because they have a bunch of different endpoints in a lot of different disciplines. And if you're going to be paying for these APIs, it's better to get an API that has access to a bunch of different things so you get more bang for your buck and you can use them across multiple projects. API Ninjas here has a ton of APIs, and I can just access all of these with one simple subscription to API Ninjas. Another good one to look for is the Zero Code Kit API. This is going to give, again, just a ton of different APIs that you can call, and it's almost just endless when you're scrolling through here. Another API kit that I love that's mostly free is quickchart.io. So if you scroll through here, it can generate all kinds of different charts for me in all kinds of different formats. So when you're researching tools to use or APIs to access through n8n, then I highly recommend using these API kits that have a bunch of different endpoints that you can access and a lot of options. That'll save you money and complexity at the end of the day. Tip number 29 is to understand the terminology of agentic systems. There are tons of different definitions out there for what an agentic system consists of, what is an agent, what is a normal ChatGPT message request, what's a workflow, what do all these things mean? Oftentimes, when a new emerging technology is coming around and words are used interchangeably, it can be confusing to figure out exactly how everything works. Now, I've probably been guilty of calling an agent a workflow or a workflow an agent in the past, and you guys are definitely sure to let me know in the comments, but I just wanted to share this Building Effective Agents blog post from Anthropic. We had an entire dedicated call in the AI Foundations community that you can find by going to the classroom, going down to our call replays. And then if you go down to the January 2025 folder, you'll see this 1.7.25 Building Effective Agents, where Drake and I go over this paper and we talk over the terminology with the community so that we can all get on the same page. I would say before you dive into n8n, this is kind of like a mandatory video to watch because it's going to get you on the same page with the terminology. But this paper serves as an amazing resource for you guys. I mean, it gives you some different agentic frameworks that you can use, and they also give you tons of different examples of what these agentic workflows can look like. This right here just looks like a normal n8n flow that we're used to. This is what they consider the augmented LLM. Or there's this prompting chain workflow. This is kind of like what I built with my financial analyst agent. And then there's the routing workflow. This is where one LLM will call one of these specific LLMs based on the requirements of the user's request, and then these LLMs finish the call. And here's a high-level flow of a coding agent. This gets super in-depth so that you guys can see exactly how this thing can be architected out in n8n. Tip number 30 is to generate structured outputs with your agent if you're looking for the same type of response every time and you need variables to fill in somewhere. In this example, I'm sending a message from Telegram to my agent, and then my agent needs to respond with a photo and a caption every single time. In this example, this agent's job is to give me an image and a caption using the structured output parser. So if I click into the structured output parser here, it's outputting the name of the meme, the image for the meme, and a message to roast me. Let's go ahead and test out the workflow. And I'm just going to say, I'm the best chess player of all time, which is not true. Let's see what it says. All right, and it came back with this meme of this guy here playing chess with this massive brain, and it says, best chess player of all time. Watch out, world. The grandmasters might want to trade their pawns for your wisdom or just run away. But ChatGPT's models aren't really good at being mean to you, so maybe I'll have to fine-tune a llama model or something like that that can give me a true roast. But the point here for tip number 30 is to use this structured output parser to always return an image and a caption. Let's try, I'm the best YouTuber of all time, and hit test workflow. And as you can see, it accessed the database, it hit the structured output parser, and then it came back with this guy right here. Now, this structured output parser is going to output a JSON object here, but since I'm not using the default chat trigger, it's just going to output the JSON, and then I can map it in where I need for that Telegram send photo node. So the output parser is one step here. It needs to have the exact output format in JSON, which it outputs like this. So it gives the name, it also gives the image, and then it gives the message. The message is going to be mapped to the caption, and the image is obviously mapped to the image field. Over here in Telegram, as you can see, I'm just passing in the variable for photo, and I'm also passing in the variable for caption, which corresponds to the image for the photo and corresponds to the message for the caption. And then if I click into my AI agent here, you're going to notice that in my system message, I give it the structure that it needs to output as well. But this structured output parser kind of forces it into that same structure every time. Tip number 31 is to add a check step with the human in the loop node. So in this example, I have a very lengthy automation that's about to happen, and it also is pretty costly. It's used to generate short form videos. So what I did is I added some decision making in here and a human in the loop node so that I can decide if I want to run this with the idea that the agent gave me. So let me zoom in here and show you what's going on. So this agent allows me to discuss new video ideas to send off to the video generator. So I just send it a message and then it gives me different ideas. And if it's just giving me an idea and responding in a conversational tone, then it can go to this conversation route. But when it's ready to actually submit an idea, it's going to go down this route here and it's going to send this human in the loop message right here. You'll notice that the difference is this one says send a message and then this one says send and wait. If it goes down this route here, it's going to go false and then denied. So then I have another if node here. So if I approve the step, then it will go to true and then it will actually go and generate that video and go down this long, expensive process. But if I select false or I deny the idea, then it will go false and it will go back and let the agent know that I didn't like the idea. And then we can continue our conversation so that it can come up with another idea. Let me show you how it works. So since my workflow isn't active, I'm just going to hit test workflow. I'm just going to say, I want to generate a video idea about coffee. And I'll send that off. Now it immediately chose to go down this idea route. Sometimes it will have more of a conversation with me, but it's actually asking for approval to send off a video. I'm just going to decline this idea so you can see what happens. So if I hit decline and then I hit open, now it's going to come back and the agent is going to see that I denied its idea. And it comes back with a conversational reply. So it says, no problem, let's refine the idea. Could you share a bit more about what kind of coffee video you're aiming for? I'm going to say, I want to have a video on technical roast profiles. And I'll send that off. And it came back with another idea here. So it says the idea is an in-depth exploration of coffee roast profiles detailing the science behind each stage of the roasting process. The video will compare light, medium, and dark roast by examining temperature curves, chemical reactions, and flavor outcomes. I'm going to hit decline again. And this time, let's just say, let's go for a simpler idea. And I'll send that off. And this time it gave me a more concise idea. So if I hit approve, now it's going to go down this true route and begin the rest of my automation. To find the human in the loop node, you can just click the plus right here, and then you can go to the human in the loop, and they have a bunch of different options here for how you can add a human in the loop. Tip number 32 is to execute a workflow with another workflow. So here I have a basic setup where I can just talk to my agent and I can send it a message, and it has the option to use this tool here to generate a video. In order to execute one of these workflows, you're just going to give your agent a new tool, and you're going to select call n8n workflow tool. This is going to allow you to define a tool. So if I wanted to post a blog or something like that, I could just use the post_blog tool, and I could type in a description of this will allow you to pass a title and content to post a blog. Then I'll go create that tool in a separate workflow. So I'm just using this as an example for right now. So this isn't actually going to post a blog, but I'm just going to hit the plus button right here, and I'm going to click on execute by another workflow. So this is going to trigger this when the other workflow executes it. And I'm just going to select define using fields below, and then I'm going to add a field, and I'm going to add a field for title, and then I'll add another field for content. Now I'll hit back to canvas, and now this is looking to accept those two fields coming in. So if I click the plus button here, I can go on to do the rest of my operations, and I'm going to be able to actually get those fields here. So I'm just going to use a wait node, and this isn't going to do anything, but let's just say it's a really long automation that I'm sending this to. Let's say it's like, 5 minutes long, and it's just passing those variables in and doing some kind of operation here. Next, I'll hit save, and I can leave this on inactive since we're executing it with another workflow. Now we'll go back to our call n8n workflow tool. Next, I'll make the source database, and then down here, we're going to select our workflow. So that workflow that I just created is called my workflow, and it's my workflow 8. So I'll click on that, and then it's going to pull in those fields that I defined. In order to have the AI actually fill out these fields, I need to use a variable here. So I'm just going to go to expression, and I'm just going to put in this expression of from AI, and I need to put a $sign in front of that. And then I can define the variable here just with some parentheses, and I can put a key here. So here I'll just write in title for the key, and then I'll copy this since it already has the format we need. I'll change this one to expression. And the only thing I need to change here is the title to content. So now it's going to know that it fills out the title here and it fills out the content there. Now I'll go back to canvas, and I'm actually going to rename this here to post blog just for organizational purposes. And I'm going to go give this some requirements here. So I'll just hit add option here, system message, and I'm going to say you are a helpful blog posting assistant. When the user chats with you and asks you to post a blog, you can write a title and content for the blog to post using the post_blog tool. Perfect. Now I'll go back to canvas and we can chat with this, and I'll also save this. And then if I were to say something like post a blog about mythical creatures, and then I sent that off, as you can see there, it just hit the post blog tool, and now it's actually posting that blog. But you'll see here that it's spinning, and the reason that it's spinning is because it needs the blog post to return back with the final node. But if you remember right, we just had it set to wait. Now, normally operations like this one or generating a video can take a really long time, and you end up sitting here and waiting for your AI agent to spin out. But what use is that if you want this agent to be able to still trigger it and then come back and talk to you right after it triggered it? I mean, I don't want to sit here for 10 or 15 minutes while these operations are running. Tip number 33 is to use a job manager agent. If you create a job manager agent, you're not going to have to wait for these blog posts to generate or these short form videos to generate if you're executing a workflow that takes a really long time. As you can see here from the last workflow, this is still spinning and it's just taking forever to execute this workflow. So what you can do instead is you can set up a more robust agent. This agent can still call another workflow, but this time this workflow here is just going to be sending off a request to an airtable database. So this request that it's sending off is going to be super fast. I'm going to show you how this manager works. So let's just say I wanted to generate a research paper. I can just have my agent go and get the workflow ID from my workflow database, which I'll show you in a moment, and then it can pass it to the request job execution. So I'll show you how this works. If I hit test workflow, and then I say, I want you to generate a blog post on red light therapy. It's going to come back and it's going to say, it sounds like you're looking for a blog post about red light therapy. Currently, we have workflows for generating short form videos and research papers, but we don't have a dedicated blog post generator. Could you please share a bit more about what you're looking for in your blog post? And then it gives me these specifications, and I'm just going to say, actually, I want a research paper about red light therapy and the benefits for sleep. And if I hit test workflow again, now I can watch this play out. So it hit the get workflow and then it came back with a message here. So it got the workflow for generating a research paper, which is a workflow I have in n8n. And it says our workflow expects a single one-line query that acts as the research paper's title. We could use a title like red light therapy, enhancing sleep quality and benefits. So it's kind of checking with me if I'm okay with this. And the other cool thing is if I test this, I'll just say, what workflows are currently busy? it should come back and say that the workflows are all ready, but this is actually able to see what other workflows are running in n8n based on my logs right here. So it says, I checked the logs and it looks like no workflows are currently busy. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with any new task. And I'm just going to copy the name of this research paper and I'm just going to say proceed with the research paper workflow. And then I'll send that off and hit test. And this time around, it should hit the request job, and it just did. Now a research paper has been sent off. It's been launched. So now I could say something like, is the research paper workflow busy? And the research paper workflow is still busy generating your paper. It's in progress at the moment. Would you like me to check the logs for more detailed information on its current status? And I can kind of just keep going back and forth with it because it has access to this Airtable logs and the Airtable workflows database. Now, what the logs look like is it's basically just a list of the logs from previous things that I've generated. So over here, I have some finished research papers that are marked as complete because all of those workflows were completed and finished. But this one's currently in progress. It says requesting to start. And then here it has the input, and then it'll bring back the output of that workflow here for me. So once this is done, it should be able to pull in the research paper URL, and then it will be able to see that it's not busy anymore. Now, the reason that it's saying the research workflow is busy is because if I go over to workflows here, you're going to see that I have a current activity threshold. This means that each workflow can only be used one at a time here. So this one is currently busy. This is the research paper workflow. And I also give it a description and restrictions for how to fill out the information that needs to go into that workflow. So once this workflow that we just sent off is no longer busy, this log ID right here, which represents this log in the Airtable, whoa, there you go. It just came in. It just finished our research paper. Let's actually see it. All right, cool. Red light therapy enhancing sleep quality and benefit. So you saw it live there. It completed. And now if I go back to my workflow, it's ready again. Now I could up my threshold here, but I found that I don't want this thing just sending off research papers like crazy. I only want it to be able to send one at a time. So if the availability is set to ready, it can send, but if it's still in progress, I don't want it sending off more than one at a time. Now, if I go back to my manager agent and I say, can you see if that is still busy? It's going to check the logs. And it says, I checked the logs for the research paper job, and it appears that there are no jobs currently in progress for that workflow. This means it's no longer busy generating your research paper. Would you like me to fetch the completed log details or further update you on the status? So now I'll just say return all the research papers in the logs. And it should go and check the logs, get the research papers here, and then it should come back to me with a response and give me some URLs for the finished research papers. And if I wanted to, I could just say, give me the research paper for today or give me a specific one. But here it just pulls back all of the research papers that were output from my other automation. Now this request job tool right here is just this basic automation that accepts an execution, gets the requested workflow ID for the workflow we want to trigger, and then it starts a new job for that workflow with the workflow ID that we required. And if it's busy, there's a fail-safe right here that goes to check if it's busy, and if so, then it will just fail the workflow. And if we go over to our generate research paper workflow, if I zoom in here, you're going to see that there's just an Airtable trigger. And this is just watching the job logs for new research papers. So if I click into here, you're going to see that it has an n8n ID. This is the ID that represents this unique workflow right here. If the status is set to in progress from the job queue and the n8n ID is present in this record that it's pulling through, then it will continue on with the rest of this super long automation. And if you wanted to, you could add different log steps in here for the different parts of the automation so that you could come back and you could basically ask your manager agent over here what's going on with the automation while it's working. And then finally, I have this log completed job at the end. This is what marks it as status complete over here in my logs. So as you can see, this is a much more robust way to handle all of your n8n workflows. Are you tired of hosting n8n in the cloud? Tip 34 is to use a locally hosted instance of n8n. First, you'll want to head over to docker.com and then hit get started. And you're going to want to download Docker Desktop for your preferred device. Then we'll open up Docker Desktop, we'll get logged in. Then you'll head over to docs.n8n.io/hosting/installation/docker. And that's going to bring you to this quick installation guide From here, they're going to give you some different commands that you can run in your terminal in order to get this installed. This is just a very basic version of it, so I'm just going to copy this. I'll open up my terminal and I'll run these two commands, docker volume create n8n data, and then the docker run command. And as you can see, you should see n8n populate into your Docker containers here. And then once it says press O to open up your browser, you can just hit O. And from here, you'll be able to log into n8n locally. There's only one problem though. If you're running this locally, you're going to have to understand how to set up your network in order to receive inbound traffic from things like Telegram and Airtable and all these other apps that you want to connect with n8n. That is, if you do want to connect other apps to n8n. Most of the time, the advantage of running locally is that you're going to be running local models using Ollama, and you're going to be using open source frameworks like OpenWebUI to chat with it. But if you do want to access these external services, then I recommend setting up Cloudflare on your device. So here's the GitHub repo for Cloudflare. And if you read into it, they'll explain how you can set up a Cloudflare tunnel client. Then you'll head over to cloudflare.com and you're going to get your domain connected to Cloudflare and connected to your Cloudflare tunnel. And then using Cloudflare Zero Trust, you can set up an email that you can log in with and it'll send you a code every time and nobody else is going to be able to enter their email here. You'll also have to set up some Cloudflare Zero Trust rules for any of the IP addresses or any other way that you want to authenticate other services that are going to be accessing n8n. Maybe you don't want to deal with having to set up an exception every single time that you want to access a tool. Maybe you want a solution that's already secure and the network is handled, and you can just let any tool have access to it. Now, this next solution may not be as private as totally running this locally, but tip 35 is to deploy n8n on a virtual private server. This is where solutions like DigitalOcean come in. If you sign up for DigitalOcean, you can create a droplet on DigitalOcean, and then you can create a virtual Docker container just like the one that I set up locally. They can handle your SSL for you, so you don't have to worry about security, and you can let all of these tools in, and they're not going to have a problem communicating with your server. After trying all of these options, I can see some use cases for running n8n entirely locally on my device. For example, if you have a solid GPU and you can run Ollama models on your device, or you want to write and read files on your computer, running n8n locally might be the only way that you can do that. But currently, I'm not using n8n for anything extremely private. So I just stick with n8n's simple cloud hosting, and if I go to their pricing here, as you can see, it's pretty comparable to a DigitalOcean server, and most of you guys are not going to have 15 active workflows. If you're scaling beyond this and you really need to level up, then you can just level up with them, and honestly, having 50 active workflows, you're probably going to pay more on a cloud server anyways, and it will probably take some extra configuration. But if you are signing up for annual, I've heard some people are using the code MAX50 to get 50% off of their annual n8n cloud subscription, and I think that's a pretty solid deal. Tip number 36 is to check out my n8n playlist. My brother Drake and I have curated a massive playlist of n8n videos for you guys, and it's ever growing. And tip number 37 is to join AI Foundations. We have a community of like-minded individuals who are not only interested in AI agents and n8n, but we're also helping you build foundational knowledge in the world of prompting, image generation, and other forms of generative AI. So if you're interested in grabbing our templates, using the course, and meeting the amazing community, then you can join using the link below.